Very cool. Now, this is, I guess, a good segue because it's going to be the one I'm going to create into the Texas sheriffs suing the Biden administration for effectively implementing a freeze on ICE. I just thought of that as the words were coming out of my mouth, but not to make light of a serious matter. Texas sheriffs are suing the Biden administration for effectively compelling Texas sheriffs not to enforce federal statutes of immigration law, and they've sued.
And they're forcing ICE not to enforce it. So what they pointed out is that the effect of that is that because basically unilaterally, without going through the Administrative Procedures Act, the Biden administration in February told all of ICE officials to basically stop arresting a lot of illegal immigrants, to stop detaining them too.
Yeah, so saving an exception which had two criteria of an imminent threat of terroristic tendencies or something. Basically, barring the most extreme example, you can no longer detain without having to go through a protocol of alerting your the acronyms were field agent or head of file, whatever, without notifying in writing superiors who would then give you the green light to detain someone who, by the time you got all this green light authorization, is so far gone you're never seeing them again. And so it's effectively useless. It effectively says, except without this very thin exception, you can't detain any illegal. They use the word alien in the lawsuit, and I'm not saying it to be provocative.
That's
you can't detain.
Legal.
Yes,
well, legal term. I mean, when people object to alien, I'm like, that's just the legal term. Folks.
Yes, Robert. Unfortunately, the law does not matter. Legal terms does not matter. Definitions of words does not matter anymore to prevent accusations of X, Y, and Z. But basically, they're saying you can't detain anybody. And if you want to, you got to go get special authorization, which takes so long by the time it comes down. If it comes down, which it never does come down, the person's long gone. The numbers were shocking because I never appreciated this. I don't live in Texas. This is not a day-to-day concern of mine in Canada. But the numbers went from like 20,000 illegal entries to 180,000 illegal entries from 2020 month over month to 2021 month over month. And the idea is that this restriction on being able to detain and deport is an actual incentive for others to come, despite what Kamala Harris says, do not come, but they're coming because of all of this, these rules being not enforced. But my biggest question was, what is the basis of a lawsuit? They're taking a civil action to enjoin the government, the federal government, to enforce the law. I mean, that sounds idiotic.
I'm going to avoid the obvious Kamala Harris joke that was present there.
or the Trump meme, which went viral and Dave Rubin shared it. I don't share the memes, but I see them and I have a sense of humor. But moving on. Yeah,
exactly. Robert, I mean, it's their legal claim is basically that as Texas sheriffs, this is imposing a huge burden on their jails because there's people they've arrested that should be put in federal facilities to be deported that now won't be. It's also creating a massive crime surge in their border communities. And Trump gained tremendously in the border communities, particularly winning in Zapata County, which is named after, I believe, Emiliano Zapata, a great Mexican revolutionary. Because they liked his strict immigration policies. What's amazing is right now in America under the Biden administration, if you trespass into the public's house, you get detained for 6 months for the January 6 people. But if you trespass into the entire country, you even get arrested. That's where the Texas sheriff's point is this is causing major problems on our jails, major crime surges in our communities, and that this is a blatant violation of federal law and outside the executive's authority, because the executive's authority is to actually enforce the law, not order them not to enforce the law. And so they filed in the Southern District of Texas. And it's a good case. So far, Biden has lost, I think, almost every immigration case. It will depend on what judge gets assigned. But even some of the Democratic judges down there in the Southern District of Texas, San Antonio and El Paso, the surge is Biden's biggest political weakness. Kamala Harris pretended to go to the border, but then she actually didn't go to the border because they don't really, they want the surge to occur. They just don't want the political consequences that flow from it. And this is what this legal strategy describes. Basically telling people not to, basically forcing ICE officers to not be ICE. It's a form of defunding the police. It's what AOC wanted. She wanted ICE abolished. so that anybody could come anytime, anywhere, any place. Now, of course, once it starts being, a bunch of Republican voters coming across the border, my guess is Democrats will change their mind. But right now, they don't anticipate that coming about. And so this is extraordinary dereliction of duty, and it's a suit that is rooted in good law. And and I think they should be considered to have standing because they're directly injured by it, despite my views about standing in general. So it will depend on the judge that they get, and hopefully the Fifth Circuit will be good on appeal. But this is they had the highest level of, I believe, it was the highest level of illegal entries and causing certain problems in history. And I think the month of May. So I mean, this is a massive, massive problem, and it's all because the Biden administration refuses to allow ICE to arrest people who are illegally present.
So I've got two questions. How does the federal government issue anything of a decree that effectively says do not abide by federal law?
Well, it's basically what Obama did with the Dreamers after he lost the House and the Senate. So, he basically came in and said, we're going to create an executive discretionary policy about how we enforce our prosecutorial policy. And what he really did was write a law that wasn't ever passed by Congress, and Justice Roberts let him get away with it at the Supreme Court. And so that's why we're here. And so he's going to keep. He knows this would never pass Congress. This wouldn't even pass the Democratic House. They're not going to pass something saying, oh, no longer arrest. Again, these are mandatory laws. These are laws that say if the person does this, you have to arrest. The person does this, you have to detain. The person does this, you have to initiate removal proceedings. They're saying, no, screw it. You're obligated not to enforce the law. But they did it in a classic, like the movie Brazil, bureaucratic way. They don't say that. They just say, before you enforce the law, call Joe, then Jack, then George, then John, then Jill, and knowing that effectively completely guts the law.
And Robert, I mean, like, I can't begin to fathom these numbers because we're talking, it was 180,000 illegal entries in, I don't know, I think it was May. I might be off on the month, but we're talking May, 150,000 a month, which is a million, or I mean, whatever, it's 1.5, it's like 1.8 million a year that would be coming in now for a population. Even if it's a population of 350 million, that's a significant amount of people. What happens? Where do they go? Where do they stay? Where do they end up? Like, on a practical level, what happens when 150,000 people a month are crossing a border into Texas?
And many of them are coming from Central America. And this is almost entirely dominated by the smugglers and the coyotes now are almost entirely run by the cartel. This was featured for our second cinematic reference, Sicario 2, was that some cartels are making more money on the human smuggling trade than they are even on the drug trade, depending on where they're at. And so, I mean, that's who he's enriching, by the way. And there's a few people that find that maybe a little curious, but that's another story for another day. That'd be a future for those people ask, what is this hush hush we're talking about? It's a series of episodes at Viva BarnesLaw.locals.com, which is about the ability to looking at alternative narratives from the institutional narrative. But there's no question. I mean, you're right. I mean, once they're out and about, the probabilities that they're ever arrested or brought back are very low. The chances that there's going to be some portion of them that will commit crime they couldn't otherwise commit is also a serious risk that these Texas sheriffs are detailing in real time because they're experiencing these crime surges. There's a reason why so many border communities trended toward Trump in 2020. They're border communities that don't see this issue as an ethnic issue, an ancestral issue. They see it as a law issue. Either we have for the law or we don't. And either we're going to protect our labor markets and our communities and neighborhoods or we won't. And the Biden administration is choosing not to. And the question is whether the courts will let them get away with these lawless actions.
Now, what is the political angle to this? Because let's just say it's 1.8 million coming in a year. They don't have the right to vote. They might be able to be hired for cheap labor, which I guess is one economic benefit to allowing this to happen. But presumably,
well, if they have children here, then those children are U.S. citizens. And that's part one. And then the assumption is that Democrats will grant them, ultimately grant them citizenship. We'll put them on a path to citizenship so that 10 years from now, they'll have a bunch of new voters.
Well, one tries not to be cynical, but that is the only logical political explanation for allowing it to happen in the first place. And hey, and it sows discord among the general population of people who then become called all sorts of names for not wanting this to happen, and they end in phobes and isms and whatnot. Let's see here. We got. I have an ideal. Texas should detain and buy bus tickets to DC for all undocumented. Okay, without getting.
I love the undocumented. I mean, whoever came up with that Orwellian phrase. It's not like they left the documents at home. They didn't forget their documents. They're illegally present, and the legal term is illegal alien. You can call it whatever you want. That's the legal term and defined in the statutes.
I'm waiting for Phil Collins to get canceled. That's the
yeah,
song.
Exactly.
They're going to ban the song at Christmas time next year. That's what's going to happen. Oh, by the way, Canadians are up 1-0 and they're down 3-0 in the series. And if it's a comeback, it's going to be the greatest comeback in the history of hockey kind. But Robert, you're going for the locals questions. I know that. While you do that, I'm going to bring up a chat.